Hello, and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Sammy Roth.
I'm Rosie Murphy, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We've got Season 6, Episode 6, Sundown, and we've got a conversation with the director of this episode, Bobby Roth.
Sundown, of course, is the famous or maybe infamous Sayid episode. You know, it needs no introduction. Let's just get into it. You all know this by now. We start every episode of The Hatch with hot takes. Sammy, what is your hot take about Sundown?
I thought it was hilarious that Dogen, he pulls out this special box with the dagger to kill the man in black. Mm-hmm. He pulls it out from a potted plant.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, he does.
I couldn't stop laughing at that. I'd never noticed that before. He just reaches into his potted plant box and pulls out the man in black dagger.
Yeah, good call.
That made me laugh. And then on a slightly more serious note, there was Miles has a bunch of one-liners and stuff this episode, but there's the scene where he says to Kate,
"It's good to see you too, Miles."
Saw you sent you packing, huh? I thought about going after him too, but I knew he'd just end up berating me until I turned around and came back.
And what I loved about this line is that it starts with it seeming like Miles is just being an asshole to Kate, as he frequently is to people about everything. And then by the end of the line, you realize, oh wait, he actually identifies with her and feels bad for her because he cares about Sawyer too, and he thought about doing the same thing, and he knows that it would have ended badly for him. And I just thought it was very sweet.
Yeah, I mean, let us not forget that Sawyer and Miles were in the Dharma Initiative together for 3 years, and we're buddies, for as far as anyone can tell. So
at this point, they've got a lot more history together than Kate and Sawyer do.
Yeah.
So anyway, I appreciated that. What do you got on the hot take-o-meter?
I'm sure this has been my hot take before. It is a crime that Sayid and Nadia do not end up together in the church.
Yep.
She is the through line of his life. In his afterlife, he is still in love with her and still seeking to protect her and protect her family. Sayid should have been with Nadia. That's it.
No, I agree with you. And we'll get into this more a little later, I'm sure. But you said he wants so badly to protect Nadia and her family. It is in fact his strong desire to protect Nadia and her family that leads him to do the thing that he promised he would not do, and to become again the person he promised that he no longer was when he shoots Kimi, after holding him at gunpoint, and Kimi surrenders. He says, "You can let me go. I'll never come back. I surrender. I'm good." And Sayid just says, "I can't." And his just acknowledgement, I am still that person. I'm claiming I'm not because I want so badly to protect them and I can't hold back.
Ugh.
And that's for Nadia.
Yeah. Before we get too deeply into our discussion of if Sayid is a good man and what makes someone a good man, etc., we are going to play our conversation with Bobby Roth, who has been on The Hatch twice before.
Yeah, he's a good guy. He's very thoughtful. He remembers very well each of the episodes that he directed, and we'll talk with him about Sundown, and also keep listening for a story about how he almost but did not direct Across the Sea later in the season.
We are here for a third time with Bobby Roth, a director who worked on Lost several times, and this time we are here to talk about the season 6 episode Sundown. Bobby, thank you for doing this with us one more time.
I obviously enjoy it.
Well, we do too, and we're glad that you're here with us again. So we've discussed with you previously the two other episodes you've directed, Whatever Happened from season 5, and The Man Behind the Curtain from season 3. Tell us about how you were brought in for Sundown. What do you remember? What you thought when you first saw the script, or what were the kinds of conversations you had when they brought you in for this episode?
Well, actually, I'll go back even a step before that. I was originally booked. You know how directors are booked where we don't know what we're going to do. They book us in May. No scripts have been written, and you just get a number. So my number was 5. I was going to do 5 and then the penultimate. And when 5 came around, it was a Jack episode, Matthew Fox episode. And Jack Bender preferred to do that one, and he said to me, "Would you mind switching with me?" And so that really is sort of a Godfather-like question. It's an offer you can't refuse. So I said, of course, and I took 6. So that's how I got to Sundown. And I didn't know at the time that there were issues with Naveen Andrews was having issues with him that I didn't have any idea about. So it kind of made it a little bit more difficult of an episode. I had no issues with Naveen. I found him to be a really good actor. He was prepared, and I thought he was effective. But I didn't realize it was kind of like pushing the boulder up the hill because Carlton and Damon were having less of a good time than I was with him.
But, certainly we have no idea what was going on with Naveen, but what I would, it's interesting to hear that, because what they made him do in the 6th season of that show was some tough stuff, and some stuff that frankly, to me at least, and I think, we're huge fans of Sayid, Rosie and I, and, it's tough to see what they make him go through in that season. He's infected by evil, and he's dead, and he's alive again, and frankly, it's a little bit all over the map, and it's a little weird at times. So I have no idea if that was, the source of any of the tension.
I really don't.
Had.
I would tell you if I knew, because we're years down the road, and but I don't really know what the issues were. My whole experience with Naveen was pleasant. He was good. I thought we were shooting good film. But I think what happens sometimes on shows is once there is a friction between the executive producers and an actor, a star, it colors everything. But it's part of a director's job, and I just wanted to share that with you, that you somehow have to navigate these waters and stay hopefully on good terms with both sides.
How did you feel when you read this script for the first time, if you remember? To Sammy's point, season 6 sort of diverges from the rest of Lost in a lot of ways. The settings are very different. The themes are a lot, sort of even more metaphysical than they were before. And this episode in particular, there's a lot of... there's like a couple of extended fight sequences, and the monster attacks the temple. It feels really different from other Lost episodes in a lot of ways. How did you...
It was certainly different from anything I had done, because I felt I was very lucky. In episodic, you don't get to choose your script. Mm-hmm. And it just, you find it and you do the best you can. And I got very lucky on my first episode, which was The Man Behind the Curtain. And I got lucky on my second episode because it was whatever happened with Evangeline. And on this one, I was a little... I thought it was clever, the idea of flashing sideways and people who had been involved before having different relationships with each other, and bringing people back like the woman who I quite liked, who played his wife.
You're talking about Andrea Gabriel, who played Nadia.
Yeah, Andrea.
Yeah,
exactly.
we've had her on the podcast before. She's lovely.
She's great. And in fact, I believe I watched this episode at her house with a bunch of people.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, she had a little viewing party. And so when I read it, I thought it was challenging. I didn't know how challenging, because part of the challenging was language. And for I'm trying to remember names. Sorry.
You're talking about Hiroyuki Sanada, who plays Dogen.
Thank you. Yes, they gave him these long speeches, and it was a struggle for him. It's not his first language, and then they wanted it to be faster and peppier, but that wasn't something that was really going to happen. And I thought maybe you guys could cut these down, these speeches, but it never got cut down. And a lot was going on at the time. They were getting into the season. I think Jack had run over on 5, so they were still shooting parts of 5 while I was shooting 6. And people were coming and going. It was by far, for me, the most difficult one to direct. But that said, there were a lot of people in it that I liked to work with. I show the fight between the two guys, Sayid and Dogen. as an example of my action stuff. 'Cause, they had a great fight coordinator, Andy Chin, who was just awesome.
That's one of the things that really stood out to me in this episode as being tremendously fun to watch. It's a very long fight sequence, and they're both so it's so acrobatic. What goes into shooting a sequence like that? What's happening behind the scenes?
A lot of planning. The stunt guys and the fight coordinators are rehearsing it and setting it up for you while you're directing the episode. So I don't know what day I did it, but it was towards the back end, 5, 6, 7, and maybe. And so they would bring me. What they would do is they would do it with stunt guys. And then they would show me, and I could make corrections and say, no, that's... And my thing about stunts is I want them to seem realistic. I don't like the big cowboy flops and stuff, which they can do. And if you leave stunt guys to their own devices, they will get bigger and bigger, because that's their thing. And so we actually shot some of the fight 2 ways, because some of it was more dramatic. But in the end, we went for what I felt was the most realistic. And the thing that made it so good for me was that we didn't double Hero. He didn't need to be doubled. In fact, nobody could have done it as good as him. This is what he does. He's a martial artist. And so then, on top of that, because Naveen's character, Sayid's character, has long hair, the stunt guy, you could almost shoot close-ups of him because it was, so... I just let them fight and shot it a little bit documentary-like, and then at the end brought Naveen in for all of the close-ups, which he was very good at adjusting and moving, and so when we went to cut it, and I had it was exactly what I wanted, and of course for me the best moment of the fight is the very end, when the ball drops.
Yeah.
We were really curious about the baseball, actually. It's this motif throughout the episode. When he dies at the end, the ball leaves his hand and floats up, and he tells the story about picking his son up from baseball practice. But was that all exactly as it was in the script, or did some of that baseball stuff come from you? We were so curious about that.
No. It was all in the script.
Interesting.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't... it wasn't... there's some shows where you invent stuff, but Lost wasn't one of them. Most of the time with Lost, the scripts are... All 3 of mine that got made, I thought were good scripts. This one had maybe a little bit more problematic stuff in it, because for me it was a little too speechy. And I think it might have been longer than the other ones. But they, the editors are very good. The executive producers know what they want. They were very good. And Carlton said to me right at the beginning, when I first started doing the show in season 3, we like them to be a little long so we have choices. So, and they give you, it's a very rich show in that the only other show, I had 10 days to shoot each episode of Lost, and I had 10 days on Grey's Anatomy, which is also a successful show, very different show, but took more time because of very different reasons. They had a lot of actors and movement in each scene, and there was a lot of walls going up, walls coming down in the shooting. On one hand, it was a burden because you had more time to think. With Prison Break, we had 9 days and more action than any of the shows, and we just ran. And it was fun, and you didn't get, you never second-guessed yourself because this is what you had, So you had to be a little more mindful with Lost.
You mentioned the last scene of Sundown being a nightmare to film. I'd love to hear more about that. I mean, there's so many moving parts. Okay. There's so many people.
Well, the worst thing was they were shooting 3 units. It was the beginning of the season. It was only episode 6, but I don't know if they added things for the end, and I knew that 5 was a big episode and that fell behind. I don't remember what was going on with 7, but on most 10-day shows, on your 9th and 10th days, you're working with a different unit. and the new unit starts. The team, the camera, all the players, all the filmmakers that are there. So what happened to me on the last day was we were shooting in a very bad area of the island, where in the rainforest, where it's got very dark and rained, and I was both losing my light, soaking wet. I had a piece of equipment, a techno crane that we were using, and whatever happened, they switched cameras, and the camera we had did not fit on the crane. And these things don't seem to figure, but what they do, how they affect you creatively, is you lose your time. And then you're rushing. And then you're trying to shoot Terry O'Quinn's last close-up in a driving rainstorm, which won't match anything else. And Evangeline is yelling, "Give it up. We're not going to get this." And she wrote me an apology letter about that later. It was funny. I love her. And Jack Bender would sometimes say to me, or I can't remember the line producer's name, but they would say, "Don't worry, we'll get it later, or we'll pick it up," because he's there and he can do it. But with me, it's a pride that I want to shoot everything that has my name on it, And so I was desperately trying to get that end. And it was a very dramatic thing, but it was pouring. It was torrential, and it didn't match anything I'd shot. Somehow it's all in. It's all in the way we shot it. But I don't know how much post work was done to make it match. But
sorry, you referred to that day. You shot that whole battle sequence in the temple in one day.
No, that wasn't the day I'm talking about. That stuff. I was talking about the exterior when Terry's group comes out to meet Naveen's group.
The last moments of the episode, okay.
Yeah, they're the last moments, and that was the last thing I shot, too. No, the battle stuff, that was difficult for another reason. That was just, I had to shoot that at noon with complete top light, but John Bartley did a great job with it. But I mean, those things that bother me, you guys probably never notice, things don't match, but when by the time you start cutting them up, the editors, they always had good editors on that show. I had 3 different editors, and they were all good.
Yeah. I think our reaction watching that sequence was just, oh my God, there's so many different things happening, and you've got the monster running around, which obviously had to have all been done in CGI later, and like half the cast of the show is involved. It just seemed like it must have been a real craziness on the set doing all that.
Yeah, that day didn't get finished properly either. I was never a fan of the smoke monster to begin with, and I didn't have any smoke monster in my first 2 episodes. So then I get to that episode, and I know, to me it was always, that's not who I am. The smoke monster, one of the problems with Lost for me is it's one of the only shows, it was one of the last shows to shoot 35. When everybody else was shooting digital, which is easier to manipulate and faster, they were still shooting 35.
That's 35 millimeter film.
Yeah, film. Shooting film as opposed to megabytes or whatever, gigabytes.
That's interesting. Do you know if that was a stylistic choice, or is that just a product of the era?
Well,
they just didn't want to switch in the middle of the show.
I think they ended up switching because Grey's Anatomy went forever. They were whole. Grey's Anatomy actually went beyond. Lost went off the air. Grey's was still shooting film when everybody was shooting digital. And I know that Shonda Rhimes was worried that she thought the digital would reveal the aging of the actors, but she was made to realize that they could degrade the image and make it look just like film. With this show, we just kept shooting 35 when everybody else stopped because it was the last year. And there were 1 or 2 other shows shooting it, and it was just, they had the cameras. But it was a bigger problem for Lost than almost anybody, because then they transported the film before it was run through the developer from Hawaii to L.A., and on more than one occasion they had whole days lost.
Oh my
in
goodness.
the X-ray machine. So I was lucky that didn't happen to me. But I mean, I've had days be ruined on other shows, and there's nothing worse going to an actor, especially an older actor, and saying, that great day we had yesterday, well, we have to do it all over. Nothing counted.
Oh, no.
This might be an unpopular opinion among Lost fans, and I haven't checked this out with Rosie yet, but I think I'm with you on this smoke monster. It's not a very good effect. It looks kind of funky and out of place when it shows up, especially when it's all big.
I never got into the lore. Maybe there's something about it that made it more appealing to the real hardcore.
Yeah, I mean, the concept was fine, I thought, but just the look of it, they could have done better with the VX.
Yeah.
It was for me always the weakest thing.
Yeah, it was much scarier when it was the specter of the thing rather than the thing itself, I think.
What's the scariest thing in Jaws? It's not seeing the shark, it's seeing the girl knowing that underneath the water they're eating her body. So imagination is always better, I think.
Switching gears a little bit, one of the other things that happens in this episode is that Claire, Emily DeRavin, returns, and she's sort of been out in the jungle, and you've been wondering what's happened to her, and she's this much sort of darker version of herself. And she sings this lullaby, Catch a Falling Star, to herself while she's sort of trapped in that pit. And then at the end of the episode, as Sayid is walking out into the courtyard where these like dead bodies all around, and you hear her singing over the score. What do you know about that happening? I think it's the only time that it happens on the show that you hear a human voice and not just the Giacchino score.
I never thought of it that way. Obviously, I shot them separately, so that was a surprise to me, but I thought a good one. It tied her to it. We shot. It's funny. I remember this now. Thank you, because we shot that her in the pit on Halloween, and I remember because. Evangeline wanted everybody to wrap early because there was going to be a party. And so, you want to be part of the gang, but my job is to get they're not going to bring me back a day later to shoot what we don't shoot. So I remember being off with Claire, with Emily, shooting that while there was a lot of other disturbances because everybody was getting rowdy. And I'm not sure, I wouldn't say they were drinking on the set, but they were getting ready to drink on the set. It was much wilder than the other two episodes I did.
So that decision to use her singing in the score at the end, that wasn't you, that was done in editing later?
Yeah, that wasn't me.
Interesting. It just did because it felt like such a an important stylistic thing for the episode to end like that. It was interesting.
I'm not sure that it didn't start with the editor and me in my cut.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a. Honestly, I don't remember. It's a lot of years, and it seemed right when I saw it though.
Do you remember anything in particular about just working with or directing Emily playing this kind of crazy, jungle-starved version of this character? It was very different than the work she'd done on the show previously.
Yeah, now that you say that, I do remember one thing because I hadn't really, the thing that happens on the show is like I can have an episode with Michael Emerson like I did at the beginning, and Terry O'Quinn, and then have almost nothing to do with them for 2 years. Because then you're focusing on Evangeline. And that was the only time I worked with her, really. I mean, she was in some group scenes in sequences. And what happens invariably, all the actors are good and they're waiting for those moments where they're alone and can do it. So that was me getting to see what she could do. And I remember thinking that she was really good and having had nothing to do. The only person I had nothing to do with the whole show practically was Matthew. I mean, he was in small scenes in everything I did, but I never really got to know him as an actor,
Well, you got to work with, Terry O'Quinn again this episode after having worked with him previously, but it's interesting because he's basically playing a different character this time.
Yeah.
That must have been fun.
Yeah, we went from kind of good to evil with Terry. I think I told you this in an earlier, probably in the first one, but Terry O'Quinn and I, the first episode of television I ever directed was a Miami Vice, and I cast him. And he was local because he was coming from like Baltimore somewhere. Right? And so when I saw him again on Lost, I said, you probably don't know this, but that was my first episode of television. And he laughed because he said it was my first episode of television, too.
Oh, my goodness. Who was he playing?
He played an attorney for the mob.
That's funny.
And very straight, mean guy. And, and had a confrontation with Don Johnson. And was obviously very good, but I didn't realize that was his first job.
That's funny. What a small world.
Yeah.
You also mentioned earlier just that it was interesting to, the Flash Sideways where you got to see sort of different versions of everybody's lives. A couple questions about that. I take it that you, like everyone else, probably had no idea when you were filming this that this was actually going to end up being revealed to be the afterlife.
That conversation ran throughout all the years. I just try to take these things as they come, and direct them straight and let the script take them to the weird places that they go.
Yeah. But you did reference that it's interesting to see, Sayid and Nadia not together in that storyline. I mean, you had to play it at face value because that's what you had to do, but as fans, I'm sure you were aware there were people who were pretty invested in those two characters being together and that there was a lot of, emotional significance between them. So it's just, it's very jarring to see them sitting, across the dinner table with the brother in the middle, as you said.
Yeah. And I like that about it. I like that there was a different history, even though there was nothing, I couldn't play it, But I did. I thought season 6 was pretty smart. I have to confess something because this always comes up, and you can cut this or not. I never saw the end. I have to tell you, almost every place I've gone, people hate the end of the show. And I get blamed sometimes. How could you end it that way? And I'm thinking, I had nothing to do with this ending. I don't even know what happened. And I just knew that it was controversial. I've never seen the last show. I kind of know what happens, but I really don't know what happens, I'm sure Jack, nobody could direct the show better than Jack, so I'm sure it's directed well. And I don't know that there was a way to end the show that would have been more satisfying to the fans. I just know that there's been a lot of, you must know this more than me. There's been a lot of criticism about the ending. But I didn't have that kind of connection to it, especially given what happened for me and not doing the last show that I was going to do.
So if you don't mind our asking about that, since you've referenced it when we've talked previously, as I understand it, you were supposed to direct the sort of history of Jacob episode with Jacob and his brother and Alice and Janney playing their mother. What happened with that?
I'll never be 100% sure what happened. I came down. I was on the lot at Disney, cutting Flash Forward, a couple of episodes of Flash Forward, and it was a Wednesday, and I was leaving Friday for Hawaii to do that episode. I had been booked on it for 6 months, and I thought, wrongly, I'll just drop in on Carlton and Damon and see how they're doing, because we have a tone meeting later, but I never get to see them face to face because they're not in Hawaii, and I'm obviously where the show is. So I went to their office and had what I thought was a fairly pleasant meeting, but they started pitching. They didn't have anything written yet, and they started pitching what they were doing, and I was horrified because I just kept saying things, and this was for my own selfish means, not even thinking about the end of the show. No Kate, no Jack, no Sawyer, no Ben. We're right near the end of the whole show, and because I believe in my heart that people do not watch TV for the stories, but they watch it for the characters. That's just been every show I've been on. Don't ask me why Prison Break was a big hit. I'm sure Wentworth Miller had a lot to do with it. And I'm sure those people had a lot to do with it. So when I heard I was going to be directing a couple of kids and a woman to be named later, because it wasn't even Allison Janney at that point, it was nobody. And I said the wrong thing many times over. So I said, well, what language are they speaking? And they looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, well, English wasn't invented 2,000 years ago. That was not the right thing to say to them at that moment.
They were probably pretty stressed out at the time, I would guess.
I made mistakes like that my whole career. And so but I didn't know how badly it had gone until I got in my car and I was driving home and I get a call from Jack saying, what the fuck did you do? And I said, nothing. He says, why did you go to a meeting? I said, I just thought it would be helpful. He said, nobody asked you. That was your idea. I said, but I thought the meeting would be positive, I just wanted to be one of the, evidently it was the wrong thing to do. That episode I finally saw later, and I wasn't wrong. I think it was the worst episode of the show that I saw.
I don't know that I would say it was the worst episode of the show, but I think your instinct looks absolutely correct in retrospect. It was a bizarre decision to take up that much real estate in the third to last week of the show without any of the characters. I'm with you on that. And it wasn't that strong a story. And if they were going to lose the characters and just focus on this, I think it needed to be a really compelling story, and I don't think that's what it was. So I think your instinct is, and I don't know if Rosie wants to agree or disagree with that, but I think your instinct is validated all these years later. We loved the finale, but that was not a great episode, Across the Sea.
Yeah. And I wonder if in hindsight, this is where they kind of lost some people going into the finale. Sammy, you watched the finale in real time. Do you think the finale might have been landed a little better with fans if Across the Sea hadn't been part of those last couple of weeks, if we had
so
stayed with the characters,
but that's an interesting theory. That's an interesting theory.
Yeah. I don't know.
I hadn't seen it that way because I've still, to this day, not seen the finale.
Right.
But now I might. But of course that would have something to do with it, And I understood they were caught up as writers in their story, and they felt they needed to tell that story. Anyway, it didn't, it didn't ruin anybody's life. I went on, they went on, the show is the show. I still, to this day, people tell me they love the show. People remember, your episodes. That's always,
So let's go back to Sundown. We've got off course of our episode here. What else that we haven't asked you about stands out in your mind from directing Sundown with Naveen and the temple and everything?
And the Sundown episode was very different. The action was different. It felt darker.
Yeah, definitely.
Jacob's Cabin was dark, but also you couldn't take it as seriously because it was all you were doing it. You were creating the darkness, and the actors were creating the darkness. Where this episode was physically difficult because we were out in the rainforest, and there are parts. I'm sure this has come up, but if it hasn't, there are parts of Oahu that are more difficult to shoot in than other parts. And I had avoided this rainforest part for the other episodes because as a director, rain is not your friend. Darkness is not your friend. So you're always looking, and they had it down. They were their location team was amazing. Their driver, their truckers were amazing. They would always find places that looked exotic, and yet you could park an entire company right there. Which was really great as a director because could rap and walk to your trailer in 2 minutes and then be back in the middle of this seemingly dark rainforest, you know. But that one was more physically dark, you know.
Yeah.
There was just, you know, and it was more difficult to film than the other two, even though it wasn't as big as the first one. You know, it was really difficult.
Yeah. Your point about the physical darkness is interesting because thematically it's also quite dark. I mean, it's dealing with this question of sort of is human nature evil or good, and it, you know, can Sayid sort of overcome these great cosmic forces? And he's asked to kill multiple people on multiple different timelines, and it feels very dark. I mean, you come away from it and it's like, wow, I just experienced something that was pretty heavy. And it's interesting to think about how the physical environment might have contributed to that feeling.
I think he brought that to it, as a good actor does, but that's why it was less fun on the set too, because he was feeling the darkness. Hero's a great guy, but he was feeling it, and he was also a little stressed because of all the words he had. Mm-hmm. And then Claire was over on another side. I didn't have as much to do with Evangeline or Michael or Terry. They were there, but they weren't there the same way. I actually only had one scene with Matthew Fox in it, and he didn't speak. He was literally like an extra. He walked through a hospital, and even that was tough to shoot because I didn't have a whole... You know, when you're doing... I don't know if this is helpful or not. You can cut it out if it's not. But as a director, you want to go to a place and shoot a lot. It's not good to have like one shot in a location. So the whole company moves to this makeshift clinic that's supposed to be a hospital, all to get this one shot of Matthew Fox walking through it and then coming around the corner and seeing something else. There was nothing about this episode that was easy for me.
Yeah.
Well, how do you feel about the episode looking back? And I asked that for, let me context for that, 2 bits of context. One is that I think Rosie and I both, you know, in our minds thought back to this episode and felt like this was an episode we were going to be frustrated by because we were frustrated by Sayid's storyline in general in the 6th season, not specific to you. But we both watched it and texted each other this morning like, oh, wow, this is actually a really good episode. Like we forgot, you know, maybe at the time it was difficult to appreciate, but looking back, it's a really interesting one to watch and very dramatic. And then also you had just mentioned earlier that there was, you know, difficulty with the executive producers with this one. So I just wonder, looking back, what's your overall takeaway, or what do you make of how this turned out?
Yeah, and I have feelings about that because I did go to that. That was the only time I ever went and saw it with a group. Like I went to Andrea's house, and she lives right in my neighborhood, and saw it with maybe 20 people who really liked it. So that, as a filmmaker, that's why I like independent. You go to Sundance and sit in Eccles with 1,200 people enjoying your movie, and it's fun. You know, normally with television, you never get that. So even if it's only 20 people, that they really liked the show, and I saw that it worked. Both Damon and Carlton are very good in post. They're very. One of the things I liked about the show was they had good editors, and the executive producers didn't feel they had to save the show every week. You know, sometimes you're working on a show and you don't even recognize it when it's finally done. They've hacked it, but I always felt that team found the best of what you did between the editor and the executive producers, and so I knew I had shot good stuff, even if they didn't like it as much during the process because of their. I felt their feelings about the actor, not the character, were behind a lot of their frustration and anxiety. And they both, and I talked to Carlton about it years later because he's in my documentary. They like the episode now, and I like the episode. I mean, all three experiences that I had on Lost were different, but they were all quality. I mean, I would do a show like Criminal Minds, and I'd get a good script, and I'd do a really good one, and I'd get a bad script, and it was really bad. And that didn't happen to me on Lost. I got, pretty good material all three times.
Yeah. I think in retrospect, and Rosie and I can go much more into detail on this, when we have our full conversation on Sundown. But I think especially after we've had this discussion, I think that, I think Naveen brought his best to it. It seems like you definitely brought it and brought your best to it. And I think that some of the story choices that Damon and Carlton made with Sayid are, a bit questionable in this season, but I definitely find it a lot more compelling now than I might have at the time.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. You get attached to your favorite characters and you want them to have good outcomes, and everybody can't get a happy ending. So,
one thing, in closing, I want to say about Lost, that more than any show, they were never coasting. They wanted and they knew that obviously certain shows, a Matthew show was going to be a bigger show than a Naveen show possibly, but they always wanted everyone, and I think a lot of that goes to Jack Bender too. He's a bit of a perfectionist in a good way, and they would go back and they would fix things that were, some shows just said that's a filler episode, or you might come to some shows that's a 7-day episode, so it's not as important. Every episode that I did on Lost felt important to them, and that makes you as a director do better work.
Yeah.
Bobby, thanks so much. This has been an awesome conversation, and we so appreciate your coming back with us for a third time on The Hatch.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy to have done all of these, and
we forgot to ask, Bobby, are you working on anything now that you'd like folks to keep an eye out for?
I'm working on 3 weird things. I'm working on a memoir, so some of this will be in the memoir, because that's what happens when you get to be my age. You start to write a memoir. And I'm working on a memoir. I'm working on a new series, believe it or not, that's in Turkey.
Oh, wow.
That's for Turkish television, so it's in Turkish, which I do not speak, but I've directed there before in translation. And I'm working on a superhero show for Turkey that I'll go to shoot first 2 episodes March. I leave in March. And I'm teaching at 3 different universities at the same time, which is very crazy. USC, Pepperdine, and Art Center. So that's me.
So for our English language listeners, you should look out for Bobby's memoirs. For our Turkish viewers, for the superhero program. And if you're a student at USC or the Art Center or Pepperdine, take his class.
Thank you, guys.
So obviously a ton of fascinating behind-the-scenes detail here. I think it is so cool that the actor who played Dogen did his own stunts in the fight sequence.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a hell of a sequence. It's really long. It's super acrobatic. And the guy's a real martial artist.
Yeah, I love that. And I also couldn't believe that, he didn't speak English very well, or that it wasn't, easy for him to do those speeches, because he sounds great. I mean, I never in a million years would have guessed that was a challenge. He pulled it off. There's so much else. I mean, despite the fact that we talked about all the stuff with Bobby, there's so much else going on in this episode that is just totally, totally fascinating. I just, one thing to pull out, I thought it was really interesting that Bobby said that he believes that deep down people watch TV for the characters, not the story. In the context of talking about that he didn't watch the finale and why people might or might not have liked certain things that they did in the 6th season. His comment about Across the Sea was they were caught up as writers in their story, and they felt they needed to tell that story, which I thought was an interesting commentary about why Across the Sea might have fallen flat. What do you think about this characters versus story thing? 'Cause I think it's interesting in the context of this episode in particular, where I'm thinking that, even though, as we talked about, I think we both enjoyed it a lot more now than we did originally, I wonder if part of the reason why it's so difficult is because even if it might have, a quote unquote good story in some ways, just it's so hard to watch what they do to Sayid. I don't know. What do you think?
I think I kind of have the opposite interpretation of this episode, which is that I don't think it's that good of a story. I mean, we've already discussed Sayid has been taken by the darkness thing feels a little bit like a story that could have been more complicated and interesting because Sayid is such a complicated and interesting character. And I think the good parts of this episode are primarily in the flash sideways when we get to see all of those things that are at play within Sayid and have been for 5 years come out. I think it's Sayid the character that carries this episode. And yeah,
That's interesting. I sort of agree with that and I sort of don't. I mean, Sayid being taken by darkness, yes, as we talked about, potentially a good thing. It's just like, if that hadn't been so literal, if that had been figurative, I think it would have been, maybe it's really all about execution, because that's an execution problem, and I feel like so is the temple stuff, just because at a high level, I like the idea of a story that is, John Locke, the Man in Black, gives them a deadline of sundown, or he's going to attack the temple, and he wants the others to, convert to his side, and he gives them an ultimatum. Like, in theory, that's a good story. Just like, I don't know, the execution of, first he sends Claire in to deliver a message, then he sends Sayid in to deliver a message, and, the CGI is so bad, and the temple set is kind of lame, like, and meanwhile Sayid has a seed of literal darkness that is growing inside of his body. Like, all of that stuff kind of undermines as well what I think would be a reasonably good story in theory.
Yeah.
No, you're right about the flash sideways. That is a strong story. I felt so bad for Sayid watching those scenes with Nadia. Like,
oh my gosh, I know.
Why is this guy putting himself through this in his own flash sideways?
Right, like what is Sayid working out here in his afterlife? Like, the primary theme of Sayid's life appears to be, I have done great wrong in the past, and in order to atone for that, I continue to have to do more wrongs in the name of something that is better, quote unquote.
Right. Whether that's shooting Kimi or stabbing John Locke in the chest.
Exactly. Yeah. And people keep fucking going to Sayid and saying, hey man, you've tortured people. How would you feel about, torturing or killing a few more people so that we can...
Going back to season 1 with Sawyer and the inhaler.
Yeah. And when he's off island with Ben, right? Like, how would you feel about continuing to commit those wrongs that you hold so much guilt over? But I promise it's for a good end. Like,
right. It's to protect the ones you love. I just wish people
would stop doing that to Sayid.
Yeah. I mean, when he says that he's not with Nadia because he doesn't deserve her because of all he's done, I don't know. I struggle with it. I mean, I see why he thinks that, but it's like, my God, like you just said, the reason he's continuing to do all of these bad things is to protect her and to protect others, and because he keeps, being presented with opportunities where that seems like it needs to happen. And so it's like, did you not, have you not earned the right to be happy? Like, I guess he really feels like he hasn't.
Yeah, and I think if there is a darkness in Sayid, I think it's this idea that, yes, he has done horrible things, and he believes that makes him bad. I bet Sayid kind of, I think the scale thing is kind of dumb. Like, oh, your scale tipped the wrong way.
Yeah, it's way too simplistic.
But I think if you asked Sayid, weigh the good and evil in yourself, Sayid would say the evil would win. Like, he believes himself to be irredeemable. And I wonder if that kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in both his life and in his afterlife. Like, to your point, he believes that he doesn't deserve Nadia because of the things he has done, but because he's in that position, he continues to do those things in order to protect her. Almost like, I've already, I'm already fallen, so I might as well stay here rather than asking my brother or, anybody else to like join me here. Is that anything?
Yeah, I think so. And it's especially tough to watch in the Flash sideways because he's trying so hard to finally break the cycle.
Yeah.
Like, I was so proud of him in the scene with his brother where, first he says, if you think I'm just going to hurt someone because you made a bad business decision, which is like, good for you, Sayid. And then Omer pulls the Nadia card, which is so, cruel of him. If you care about Nadia, if you care about her, you will do this, Sayid. And Sayid says, I'm sorry, I'm just not that man anymore. And it's like, thank you, good for you. And then, but then the opportunity presents itself and he just, like he says, he can't help himself.
They threaten Nadia's children.
They do.
Like what choice does he have at that point? I guess.
I don't blame him.
Yeah.
Life is getting in the way of his desire to be a new man.
Yeah.
It's really tough. It makes me, on the island, if you don't mind me going back to that.
Yeah.
One thing I was feeling watching, the manipulation of Sayid here, it makes me so angry at the Man in Black and also at Jacob. I mean, just this whole setup where, Dogen, seeing him here as a representative of Jacob, I guess, like the last little dialogue before Sayid, goes full darkness and tosses Dogen into the water and drowns him and slits Lennon's throat.
Jacob drives a hard bargain. The man outside. I take it he offered you a similar bargain. Yes.
It lines the two of them up together so nicely because on the one hand, with the Man in Black, it's like, it's so cruel how he dangles in front of Sayid this idea of seeing Nadia again, which we know he can't do. Like, it's just a total flat-out lie, and it works perfectly on Sayid and makes him go back to do these evil things again. And on the other hand, we've got, Dogen telling the story of Jacob, who, said, I'll save your son. Who knows if he actually did it? Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But, you'll never see him again. You have to come work for me on the island, which clearly works magic on Dogen. And then we've got, Dogen the same here. Like, I think the Man in Black is right that he probably intended for Sayid to get killed, that he probably knew the knife couldn't kill the Man in Black, and that he just hoped that the Man in Black would kill Sayid in return. So it's like, these like sort of god figures are just running around, manipulating Sayid, in their own direction, however they want. And meanwhile, it's his soul in the balance and his his feeling about what kind of a person he is. It's awful.
Ugh. Yeah, and it makes you wonder if, I'm thinking about like what John Locke does for Charlie early in the series when he's able to be that person who says, we can get you out of this, we can get you out of addiction. Like, as misguided as he may be in some of those ways, like, he is able to act as a guide. Sayid is too smart for that, kind of. Like, he's not going to trust easily, and I think it would be very hard for anyone to go to him and say, Sayid, you can be redeemed. Let me help you. Like, I don't know who that person would be to whom Sayid would say, okay. But I wish someone would. That's all.
Yeah. The addiction comparison is interesting. With Charlie, it's right. It's not like he's addicted. Like, he's making like rational seeming level-headed choices. But it definitely seems like the darkness, literal or figurative or whatever, is like beginning to interfere with his thought process, though, because it's like the scene where Locke makes him the offer, like, well, how about you join my team and do this for me instead? Sayid kind of calls him out and says something to the effect of, well, after Locke explains, well, Jacob and Dogen are manipulating you here. Clearly, Locke's Sayid's like, well, what do you want? Well, what do you want from me? Because you haven't killed me yet, so clearly you want something.
Right.
So, that part of Sayid's brain is still like sort of working.
Right.
But then, after he dangles, by the end of the episode, after Nadia is dangled in front of him and after he's, done these, terrible murders, like in that last sequence, Sayid has this like half crazed smile on his face.
Ooh.
And it's
the
like,
line,
okay.
"Not for me," is like an all-time great line delivery.
There's still time. Not for me.
No, I agree. It's an amazing... That whole sequence is amazing. I mean,
It's
Michael
really good.
Emerson's acting and Sayid's response, but it's like, no, there is still time for him. And something is messing with his brain at this point. And so I think you're right. Like, I do think there is an opportunity, actually, for someone like Locke, real Locke. If there were someone here who could do that for him, to come in and to tell him, no, there is time. I think you're onto something there.
Yeah. Is that part of what Nadia is doing in The Flash Sideways? Like, the conversation about how Sayid doesn't deserve her. It seems like what she is sort of saying there is like, let us help you. Like, it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to be this person. Like, your fate is not sealed. And Sayid seems to be saying basically like, yeah, it is.
Well, in the regular timeline he is, but in the Flash Sideways he's he listens to her, at least at first.
Yeah.
Like, until he gets picked up by Kimi's men, like.
Right.
And by the way, it's Nadia telling him that stuff, not Shannon.
You know what? I'm more okay with the idea of the darkness if I think about it as sort of Sayid's belief about himself. He no longer has any hope for his own redemption. He no longer has any like interest in being anyone else or trying to not be that man anymore. It's like I wonder if there's something to like he has succumbed to his own inner demons. And that's the darkness that grows in him, and maybe in all of us.
I hope not.
Rather than some weird, like, outside force that took possession of him or whatever.
I agree. I mean, unfortunately, the show explicitly says otherwise, but I agree. I like
know.
it better thinking about it that way.
But
I guess he'll start to turn around, like, we think about him sacrificing himself at the end of the season, but now that I guess it's really when he chooses not to kill Desmond that he really starts to make that final turn back towards the light after Locke sends him to shoot Desmond in the well.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that part. Can we talk about Dogen a little bit?
Of course.
I thought Dogen was fascinating this episode. And, makes me add to my opinion that he's just a criminally underutilized character that I wish they'd kept around. But, like, I don't know. First of all, as I think I've said before, I love his story about his son.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, just seeing how, he was manipulated by Jacob and how it was that he ended up here, like, it hits home for me, his speech about what happened. And one thought I had about the baseball moment that hadn't occurred to me previously. But one, I like how the baseball is, the thing that makes him show mercy to Sayid, and that it reminds him of his son and reminds him what he's doing here, and he ends up, holding back.
I actually have a thought about that.
Please.
Is it merciful to let Sayid go and send him off on a suicide mission, basically? Is that more merciful than just killing him in the moment?
Fair.
I don't know if I would call it mercy.
No.
But
you're totally right. It's not mercy. I guess he's trying to protect his own soul a little bit from what he still feels needs to be done.
Yeah.
Like he still wants to fulfill his job and his mission when he feels that Sayid needs to die. By the way, another great line delivery this episode is, "I think it would be better if you were dead." That is a fantastic line reading by Hiroyuki Sanada. But no, you're totally right. He's still sending him to get killed, but he can't bring himself to do it himself, which is an interesting comparison to what's going on with Sayid, by the way, now that you mention it.
Sayid would probably never send someone to get killed. He would just do it himself.
He would.
Yeah.
But then I was also thinking at the end when he releases the baseball after he drowns, it occurred to me that, wow, knowing that he was about to die here, the very last thing he did in life was he held on to that baseball as tight as he could for as long as he could. Like he's thinking about his son in that moment until the very, very end as he clutches that baseball as tight as he can, which I think is super powerful. But then, the question that I have with Dogen, I actually ended this episode thinking that he did not strategize very effectively at all. And that's not a criticism of the writers or anything. It's just like Dogen gets so badly outplayed by the Man in Black, which I just think speaks to the power and the manipulative skill of the Man in Black. Like he sends Sayid on the suicide mission, which the Man in Black, so deftly, doesn't fall for. Like, Sayid literally buries a dagger in his chest. And
Oh my god. Another all-time great line reading is when the Man in Black pulls the dagger out of his chest and says,
Now why'd you go and do that?
so true. But again, it's just like he, Dogen thought that he would have an angry reaction and kill Sayid. It's like, nah, he's not phased for a moment. Like, he's ready for it, and he goes right into the counter manipulation, which is even more effective.
mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is when Sayid goes in and announces, the ultimatum, join the Man in Black by sundown or be killed, and he announces that Jacob is dead, and that's really what gets people, I think.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so wow, the others were not actually that loyal to Jacob, which is real interesting in its own respect that works so well. Oh, Jacob's dead. I guess we're done here. We're going to go join the enemy. But what a strategic blunder for Dogen to not tell his people that Jacob is dead and to leave that to be revealed to them by the Man in Black and to undermine his authority and Jacob's authority. Like, I don't know if he could have or should have seen that coming, but clearly it was a fuck up to not tell them that himself.
The people Jacob chooses for leadership. Why? Like, you think about Richard, Dogen, and I guess, the candidates as much as that's happening. It's more like he's recruiting, like, people who he has something over, right? Like, who he can...
Yeah.
They're desperate, and he makes them his pitch, and that kind of sucks. And it also doesn't seem like a great way to run your operation if you are, like, committed to the cause of keeping this cork in the bottle, right? Keeping this great evil siloed on this island. Like,
I agree with you. He takes these people who are very deeply flawed, and you're right, it's because he has something over them, but I also think it goes back to this idea that he's trying to prove something to the Man in Black, like, that people, that flawed people can change and make good choices. To disprove they come, they fight, they destroy, they corrupt. It always ends the same. Like, maybe that doesn't just apply to the candidates. Maybe Jacob is running a version of that with the others and with the leaders of the others as well. It would certainly explain why none of the leaders seem like the right people, as you're saying, and also why not too many of the actual rank and file members of the others seem like they're especially dedicated to the cause. Like, outside of like people like Mikhail Bakunin maybe, but not and Richard until Jacob dies. But like Sayid comes in and is like, Jacob's dead, you're free to go, and I go, okay, I guess it's time to go. I don't know. It was Jacob just.
Yeah.
I also was thinking just. If he had really, I think it also reflects that he doesn't really care about these people. Like, very clearly they're pawns to him. Like, they're pawns in a game, in an experiment, whatever is going on here. Like, the fact that, I think he could have built a lot more loyalty and a lot more, like, dedicated following if he had shown his face once in a while. If he had, come down from Mount Olympus and, like, talk to the people and filled them in on, what his thinking is or why they're there. Like, it might have prevented something like the mass exodus this episode if they really believed in the dude, but he just didn't care that much. He just didn't care that much. And maybe there's, and that leads to strategic blunders too, but I think it fundamentally comes from a place of, like, this is all a little bit of game to him. Like, he wants to keep the cork in the bottle, but does he really care about protecting the rest of the world from evil, or does he just care more about proving the point to his brother? That just occurred to me now, but I think there's something to that.
Jacob doesn't want to be, like, worshipped or adored, or he doesn't really seem to care that these people care about him either. Like, they are pawns to him, and he seems fine with them knowing that, basically.
Interesting. Well, it goes back to Ben. What about me? What about you?
Right, exactly.
I really think what it is just he cares a lot more about beating his brother or proving his brother wrong than he really does about any of the actual events that happen on Earth. Like, that's really his motivator, much more than any sense of, like, ethics or goodwill to man.
Yeah, that tracks.
every episode in season 6 is basically a Jacob episode.
Yes. Let us know what you think. Do you think Jacob cares about any of these people? Do you think there is a darkness in Sayid? You can give us a call at 9546-DHARMA and leave your hot take. Try to keep it to 60 seconds, and we might play it on the show.
I kind of found myself wondering in parts of this episode, like, is this too dark even for Lost? Like, I enjoyed it. Don't get me wrong. Like, I enjoyed some of the dark parts, but, like, I don't know. I don't know if there's anything to that or not, but, like, I don't know that Lost
the man
ever...
in black straight up pulling a dagger out of it, like a bloody dagger out of his chest, was sort of like, oh.
And the moment where Sayid not only, just like drowns Dogen, but then like even more brutal, I thought, was when Lennon shows up.
Ooh, yeah.
And Sayid just turns and like in one fluid motion slits his throat with no warning. Like that was a lot to see on screen.
Very little gore in Lost, and this is possibly the most that we get. And I don't love it.
No,
but it's effective.
It is. It's just, I don't know. I did enjoy watching this more than I thought I would.
Me too.
It's difficult to watch at times. There are parts that I really just don't like. Mm-hmm. But it has more virtues than I remembered.
That consistently is the case in season 6, isn't it? Every single week we've said that.
Yes, it is. We've got a lot more season 6 to discuss, and next week is one that actually I think we remember very fondly, which is Dr. Linus.
We will get into the nitty-gritty details of that episode with Michael Emerson, who you heard last week as well.
Yeah, it's an amazing conversation. Stay tuned. You want to be part of the conversation? Once again, Rosie said it earlier, call and leave us a hot take, 9546-DHARMA, +1 if you're outside the United States, 60 seconds or less if you can help it.
We are on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast. We love it when you leave us a rating and a review in the podcast app of your choice.
Our cover art is by Danny Roth. Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen.
We'll see you next time.
Namaste.